Boys and girls, it's Mrs. Foley. I'm here to read chapter 2 of Peter Pan with you. I know Miss Landry started reading this book with you and read you chapter 1 called Famous Last Words. And the chapter ended when the Darlings, the parents, were talking about Peter Pan, and Mrs. Darling was a little worried that Peter might cause them some trouble. Mr. Darling said not to worry about anything, and then the chapter ended calling his words famous last words, so maybe there is something to worry about. We shall see. Chapter 2 is called Now, Peter, Now. I hope you enjoy this book as much as I do, because this is one of my favorites, just like Miss Landry actually mentioned. We both really enjoy reading this book, and I know all the third grade teachers do, so I hope you enjoy reading it along with us. Now, Peter, Now. Children often find even the strangest events rather commonplace. For example, they might casually mention that when they were playing in the woods last Wednesday, they met a ghost and played tag with him on roller skates. Wouldn't that be strange? It was in just this way that Wendy revealed something quite upsetting to her mother one morning. Mrs. Darling was tidying up the nursery, cleaning it up a little, where all of the young Darling children slept, and she discovered some leaves on the floor. She asked Wendy about them, but Wendy merely replied, "Oh, Peter must have left those leaves." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Darling asked nervously. "He really is quite messy," said Wendy, who was a very tidy child. With a sigh, she explained that Peter often came to the nursery at night and sat at the foot of the bed, playing the flute. "Sweetheart," Mrs. Darling assured her, "the front door is locked at night. No one can get in." "He comes in through the window," Wendy insisted. "He can't possibly. We are 3 stories up." They mean like floors. That's another word for floor, story. So they're 3 floors up. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" her mother cried. "I got hungry and forgot," said Wendy, who was now feeling rather hungry again. While Wendy went to look for a snack, Mrs. Darling stayed behind, still frowning about the leaves. The thing that scared her the most was that she was fairly certain that they were from a tree that did not even grow in England. She searched the room for other clues, but found none. "You are making a fuss out of nothing at all," Mr. Darling insisted when she told him. "Now come to bed." "I suppose you are right," Mrs. Darling said. Only he wasn't right. That very next night, she tucked the children and went downstairs to sit by the warm fire and sew, and she fell asleep. Almost immediately, she started to dream. She dreamed that Neverland had drifted too close to the beach, and that a strange boy had jumped into the water and was swimming toward her children. Wendy, John, and Michael were on the shore, happily waving at him. This might have only been a silly dream, were it not for the fact that upstairs the window of the children's bedroom had blown open, and a boy really had flown in and dropped onto the floor. With him was a little light, no bigger than a fist, that darted around the room like a little mosquito. Looked like a little bug. It was a tiny little light. Mrs. Darling woke with a start. She knew at once that the swimming boy was Peter Pan. She ran upstairs, threw open the door to the children's bedroom, and sure enough, there he was. He was wearing clothes made of leaves, the same strange kind that he had left behind last time. But the strangest thing about him was that although he must have been very old now, at least as old as she was, he still seemed to have all of his baby teeth. So he was very old, just like Mrs. Darling was, but he didn't look any older than a child. When Peter saw Mrs. Darling, he bared those pearly little teeth, and he growled at her. Mrs. Darling screamed, and in a split second, Nana was there. Nana, remember, is the dog. She growled too and lunged at Peter. He dodged her and jumped out the window. Mrs. Darling screamed again. After all, she didn't want the boy dead, because she thought he had fallen out the window. She looked down, but saw no broken body. Looking up, she saw what looked like a shooting star speeding away. When she turned, she saw that Nana had something in her mouth. It was Peter's shadow. So you know how sometimes when the light shines on you, you cast a shadow behind you? Well, Peter had a shadow that was kind of cast behind him, but somehow Nana the dog was able to catch that shadow. Do you think that could happen in real life? No, you couldn't really catch someone's shadow, but in this story, since it's a fictional story, that's part of the story. The dog catches Peter's shadow. Nana had nipped it with her teeth right before Peter jumped, and then the shadow had snapped off. Nana wanted to hang the shadow out the window so that Peter could come back and get it without bothering the children. But Mrs. Darling thought that it would look like laundry drying. Mr. Darling would be upset if the neighbor saw that. She thought it would look a little embarrassing to have clothes hanging outside. That's what it might have looked like. Instead, she decided to stuff the shadow into the bottom of a drawer, hidden away like one of her children's unpleasant thoughts. So she was just going to hide it in a drawer. "That horrid dog," Mr. Darling said when she told him the next day what had happened. "She can't go around snapping off people's shadows left and right. Why, we'll be sued." He was afraid that they're going to get in trouble. Someone was going to call a lawyer and say, "We're going to take you to court." That's what it means when you get sued. Poor Nana, and poor Mr. Darling, too. He knew he was being awful and unfair, but he couldn't help it. He was frustrated and jealous about other people doing better in the stock market and about the children loving Nana so very much, possibly more than him. So Mr. Darling was afraid of what? What was he worried about? He was afraid that his children loved the dog more than they loved him. So he's feeling kind of sad. It didn't help matters that Nana had brushed up against him yesterday, getting white hair all over his coat. "Go to the doghouse where you belong," he yelled at her. "George," Mrs. Darling whispered, "remember what I told you about that boy? What if he comes back and Nana's not here to guard the children?" But Mr. Darling would not listen. He was determined to show everyone who was the master of the house, and so out Nana went. So Nana's getting sent outside to her doghouse in the yard instead of being inside with the children. That night, as Mrs. Darling was putting the children to bed and lighting their nightlights, they heard Nana downstairs in the yard barking. "She is just protesting being chained up," John said. That means she was complaining because she's chained up. Wendy was wiser, however. "No, that is how Nana barks when she smells danger," she said. Mrs. Darling shuddered. She didn't like the thought of danger. Outside, she saw a million stars, some of which seemed to her to be hovering around the house, as if trying to get in. So she thought some of those stars might be trying to get in the room. And remember when Peter jumped out the window, she didn't see him afterwards, but she saw a star kind of flying away in the sky. That's interesting. Oh, how she wished that she and Mr. Darling did not have to go to a dinner party tonight. "Don't worry, Mama," Michael said. "Nothing can hurt us when our nightlights are lit. Isn't that right?" This was something Mrs. Darling had told the children in the past, so she couldn't very well take it back now. "That's right," she said soothingly. "Nightlights are the eyes of a mother. The eyes that a mother leaves behind at night to watch over her babies." Besides, she told herself, she and Mr. Darling would be so close, only a few houses away. What could possibly happen? What do you think might happen? So Mr. and Mrs. Darling, the parents, are putting the kids to bed, and they're going down the street to a different house, and Nana's out in the backyard. What do you think might happen? Make a prediction. Tell someone in your family, or you can just say it to the screen. What might happen? Let's see if your predictions are right. A few minutes later, Mr. and Mrs. Darling were outside, strolling arm in arm to their dinner party, but they were being observed from above. Mean to observe? Like looking at something closely, right? So something up above is observing them. Maybe it's the stars. It was the stars spying. The old stars were glassy-eyed and bored, but the little ones were curious and full of wonder and winks. Can stars really spy on you? No, they can't. But in this story, it's like the stars are alive and they're watching. And maybe there might be people out there flying amongst the stars that are watching. They didn't particularly care for Peter, who liked to sneak up behind them and try to blow them out. So the stars didn't really like Peter because he tried to play with them and blow out their light. But they were generally fond of fun, and Peter was all about fun. So they decided to help him tonight. So the stars are going to help Peter. The instant that Mr. and Mrs. Darling were safely inside the neighbor's house, a commotion broke out in the heavens. That means up in the sky. A chorus of the smallest stars in the Milky Way cried out, "Now, Peter, now!" What do you think that the stars are telling Peter to do? I want you to find a piece of paper or a journal or even on your computer. Maybe you could write. What do you think is going to happen next? What do you think those stars are telling Peter to do? Now, Peter, now. Said that they were going to try to help him with something. So the darlings just went out. The kids are sleeping, all tucked in their beds. And the stars are telling Peter now's his chance to do something. I wonder what's going to happen next. That is the end of chapter 2. I hope you join us for chapter 3 soon.